Secretary Baker, I enjoyed your testimony, particularly the discussion of the ideas of selective engagement and the talk of regime change. The president has now admitted really that it was a mistake to topple Gaddafi in Libya, but he sort of says, well, it wasn't necessarily a mistake to do it. It was just a mistake not to be prepared to create a country out of nothing and put, I guess, massive amounts of resources and create a nation in Libya. And so I think there are a couple of possibilities. One is, well, maybe you shouldn't do it to begin with. And then the other is, well, we do it and then we have massive resources and we create nations. And I think, then the question is, how do we create democracy in the Middle East? But I think if there's no tradition, thousands of years of autocratic rule. I mean, I think people don't realize that in our country, one of the amazing things about the American Revolution is we had representative government for 150 years before that, but we had an 800-year tradition of it. Yeah. And we had continuity of that. And we think we can just blow up Gaddafi and all of a sudden out of that Thomas Jefferson will get elected. And I think it's a naive notion, but it needs to go back to not that we need to be better prepared. Maybe sometimes the selective engagement should be, this is a time we shouldn't select to militarily engage. But I think it's important also, and I'd like to hear your comments with Assad also, because it's the same sort of situation. And then the only other thing I'd mix into that to see if you'd comment on it is that I think ultimately the solution in Syria is not saying, well, Russia can be no part of it. I think Russia's got a base there and been there 50 years. Probably engaging Russia on a solution to Syria may be part of the answer.
They absolutely have to be a part of it, and so does Iran. I mean, the idea that we could come to some sort of an accommodation or agreement with respect to the future of Syria without having those two players is ridiculous. I think, Tom, you'd probably agree with that. And so, I mean, I think we can have bipartisan agreement on that. That would be, they got to be at the table. If you're going to have and that's, I think, what Secretary Kerry is now trying to bring about. Some sort of an agreement or negotiation that would tend to improve the situation. But you're quite right in your comment about selective engagement. That's why I like the paradigm, because you look at each one of these discrete and specific foreign policy problems through the prism of our national interest and our principles and values, and you say to yourself, okay, if we take this action, where's it going to land? Where's it going to lead? What's it going to lead to? And decide then that's the way a president ought to approach these things, and look at where the vital national interests of the country are at stake. You might decide to even go as far as the military. If you don't get to that point, you still have the tools of our political, economic, and diplomatic engagement.
Well, I like the idea of the guiding principle being our vital national interest. But to me, I think sometimes we too quickly jump to that as the conclusion, because then that's a debate. What is in our vital national interest? And I think what becomes important there is that Congress have a role in this, because our founding fathers didn't want to give all the power to the executive.
No, but
they dispersed the power.
They gave most of it to the president. I mean, I'm a creature of the executive branch, so you have to understand my bias. But the president has certain foreign policy powers, I think, that were given to him by the founding fathers. I'm sorry to interrupt.
But I would just say also that even President Obama admitted when he ran for office that no president should unilaterally go to war without the authority of Congress. President George W. Bush came twice, both in Iraq and for the 9/11 use of authorization of force. My point is that in determining what is in our national interest, if we have debate, then we can get to what is actually in our national interest. But that means that Congress has to retain some authority, and that we should ask Congress's permission before going to war, particularly Libya. He should have come and asked. My guess is the debate would have been very messy, but maybe we wouldn't have gone into Libya. Gaddafi might still be there, might still have problems, but we wouldn't have chaos.
I certainly agree with that, Senator Paul. It's always best if the legislative and executive branches are on the same wavelength when you start talking about sending our young men and women into harm's way. So whenever it's possible, the president should come to the Congress and seek their approval. You know, in the first Gulf War, I'm convinced that President Bush 41 we had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, and it was extraordinarily unpopular to do what we were beginning to do. getting ready to do. And the only way we got approval of Congress was to go first to the Security Council of the UN and get a use of force resolution by them. Still, President Bush brought the matter, President Bush 41, to the Congress. But I want to tell you something. Had the Congress turned him down, I still think he would have done what he did. I don't think we'll ever resolve that issue of who has the ultimate power, the commander-in-chief or Congress's ability to declare war.
Well, one of the exceptions that is granted by almost everybody on whatever side of this issue you're on is that if we're under imminent threat, you know, if there are missiles being launched against us, obviously the commander-in-chief would want to have the power to make an imminent response. And the president said this in 2007 when he ran, unless there's an imminent threat. And when I questioned him on Libya, he said, yes, there was an imminent threat to Benghazi. And I was perplexed by that answer because I always thought an imminent threat was to the United States, not to a foreign city. Because if we make the standard that an imminent threat to any city around the world would be okay for the president to unilaterally begin a war because any city around the world was under imminent threat, I think that would be a standard that would be absurd. I mean, wouldn't you recognize the standard at least to be that the imminent threat would be to the United States or to a military base of ours or to some sort of asset of ours?
Well, yes, but if you look at Article 51 of the UN Charter, it says that any country that feels they need assistance can call on another UN member state to assist them. And that's exactly what happened when we went into Kuwait to kick Iraq out of Kuwait. It wasn't an imminent threat to the United States. There was no imminent threat. There was no threat to the United States at all. We went into, you know, the surest and best test of a great power is if you have to act unilaterally, you do so. Always best to act multilaterally. I know we would agree on that, but that's the best test of a great power. If it has to act unilaterally, we went into Panama with nobody's consent. Okay, they were brutalizing our servicemen down there, and we invaded. We took it over. We grabbed Noriega and brought him back to the United States. So there are circumstances when that is appropriate, I think. On balance, it's always better for the executive and legislative to be in sync and for the United States to act with allies.
Thank you, and I would just hope that it would be more likely to be the exception than the rule.
Can I just add to a couple things to Senator Paul's question. Number one, in the analysis, as Secretary Baker said, there are a lot of policy options between an invasion and doing nothing, right? And that has to be part of the analysis as you measure up how your interests are implicated and then match them up with the activities that you undertake. Number two, I agree with respect to Syria, and this President Obama and Secretary Kerry are deeply engaged in, that a political solution there is first best. And we're working on that, obviously, with the Russians specifically. But third, it is important, and we talk about governance and we talk about a lot of the other things that we need to do as a nation. It is important to understand that we have a really serious security problem with ISIS. And we will not be settling the problem with ISIS at a peace conference. And the United States is going to have to lead an effort to eliminate that threat. And it's going to be through force, unfortunately. And last, I agree with Secretary Baker, obviously, is that we have all manner of obligations around the world, including obligations to our allies and partners and coalitions, which obligate us to act with force if sometimes necessary.
The only quick response I would make to that is, with regard to ISIS, we have to ask the question, are they bigger and stronger because of our involvement in pushing Assad back and creating a space for allowing them to grow, or would they be less likely to be a threat if Assad were still stronger?